Hi, and welcome to The Working Songwriter, the show where today's best songwriters come to talk shop. I'm your host, Joe Pug. Each episode here, we host a distinguished guest, and we ask them to go deep on their inspiration, on their process, on the general ups and downs of making a life in music. So, whether you're a grizzled veteran, showing your nephew the Les Paul guitar that Dwayne Allman once borrowed from you at a gig, or else a scrappy upstart, showing your uncle the MIDI controller that Skrillex once borrowed from you at a DJ set, this is your show, because ultimately it is what every writer seeks most, an ironclad excuse to put off actually writing. Hey everybody, it's the fourth Friday of January 2021, and I thank you for joining us. This week's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. I'm old enough to remember when you had to pay somebody called a web developer to get a website made, and it would always be some guy named Gabriel who drove an Acura Integra with an aftermarket spoiler and a Von Dutch bumper sticker, and who was always trying to sell you pirated copies of the movie Gattaca. And old Gabriel would charge you about $1,000 for a website that would be obsolete in 6 months. But it's the future now. You guys, that's not how it works anymore. We're allowed to have nice things now. One of those nice things is Bandzoogle. Bandzoogle powers the websites of tens of thousands of musicians around the world, from weekend warriors to Grammy winners. Everything you need for a professional website is already built in. Hosting and a custom domain name, dozens of fully customizable design templates, tools to sell your merch free. Wait, no, don't sell your merch for free. Sell it commission-free via Bandzoogle. Mailing list tools, social media integrations. It's a really great product. Listeners to the Working Songwriter podcast can go to bandzoogle.com to try it for free for 30 days. Just use the promo code TWS, the initials of our show, TWS, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. If you'd like to hear some of my music live in the coming weeks, every single Sunday night at 9 p.m. Eastern, I'm over on YouTube for Sunday Songs. That's a live stream. I'm live every Sunday night. I'm playing tunes. I'm taking questions in the live chat. I'm taking requests in the live chat. It's a really fun and interactive experience. I dare to say that we're building something of a little community over there on Sunday nights, including many people who are listeners to this podcast. So come on over and be a part of it. Every Sunday night, 9 p.m. Eastern on YouTube. Head to YouTube and search for Joe Pug, or just go to joepugmusic.com and click on the live stream tab. Finally, if you enjoy this podcast, if you'd like to help it remain a viable endeavor for me, here's a couple things that you could do to help. First, you can become a supporter of the show over at Patreon. Patreon is a platform that allows you to directly support creative endeavors that you find meaningful. You just head to their site, Patreon, you search for The Working Songwriter, or you search for my name, and then you sign up to kick in a few bucks every month for the show. Think of it as a voluntary subscription, a subscription that you don't have to pay, but that you choose to pay because you dig the show and you won't miss a couple bucks at the end of the month. If just 1% of our listenership would kick in the price of a cup of coffee every month, it would make a huge difference. So thanks to everybody who's already done that. And if you're not in a place where you can do that, I totally get that. You could still help out the show by either leaving us a review in the iTunes store, preferably a 5-star review, or simply telling a friend about the show. The simple math on those two last things is that they will help me much more than they will be a pain in the ass for you. All right, I'll end all the harassment there. This is a very fun and very interesting episode. I hope you dig our conversation. Our guest this week got his start in the DIY world of the Indiana punk scene and now helms the prestigious roots music label Rounder Records as its president. John P. Strohm hails from Bloomington, Indiana, where he first fell in love with music. After high school, he moved to Boston, where he co-founded the punk folk outfit Blake Babies with Juliana Hatfield. That group actually got their name by attending an Allen Ginsberg poetry reading and afterward raising their hands and asking him to name their group. After signing to Mammoth Records, the group saw success on the college radio circuit before calling it quits in the mid-90s. John formed a few more groups of his own and then pulled a few stints as a member of alternative rock mainstays, the Lemonheads, at the height of their success. Around the turn of the century, he decided to make a career switch and attended law school. For a while, it looked like he might leave his creative roots behind entirely and forge ahead into the world of corporate law. But music continued to call his name, and he became the attorney for music clients such as Bon Iver, Alabama Shakes, Sturgill Simpson, and Dawes. His professional life came full circle when he took over the reins at Rounder Records, an historic American label that had traditionally been the home to acoustic music royalties such as Alison Krauss, Tony Rice, and John Hartford. Rounder is currently home to a new generation of roots music stars such as Sarah Jarosz, Rustin Kelly, and the War and Treaty. Last week, I caught up with John on the phone to hear about his journey so far and also to hear about where he thinks the business of music is heading. John Strohm, thanks so much for being a part of the Working Songwriter podcast. You got your start playing pretty DIY punk music in the Indiana scene. I think when you think of punk rock music, Indiana might not necessarily be the first word that comes to mind for a lot of people around the country, but it seems like digging in here that you guys actually had a really robust community going on. Then can you talk about getting your start there and what it was like?
Sure. Have you seen the documentary American Hardcore?
I have not, no.
Oh, you should watch that. It's an excellent documentary. But one of the things that documentary really emphasizes is how regional hardcore was in the early 80s and how this is so different from how things are now with the internet and with social media. But back then, we were all in our little regional cocoons. And one of my great friends from that era is a guy named Paul Mayhern, who had a band called the Zero Boys, who were one of the great hardcore punk bands. And they were sort of our flagship band. And we had to really make our own adventure there in Indiana. We had to figure out by reading fanzines and stuff how to put on real shows, how to get bands to come to town, and how to put together an all ages venue and things like that. And it was a really amazing time in my life, and I think when I look back on everything that's happened since then, it was really formative. I was passionate about the music, but so much of it was how do we make this real? How do we do something that's going to actually get on the national radar, more or less, and be something that we can really do on the level of the bands that we admire.
That's really empowering because it's totally different than the model of like, all right, well, let's put together a demo and then we'll send it out to the powers that be in the music industry and hopefully something comes back. We'll just sit here and wait. That's more of an approach of like, well, let's do this. Let's build this piece by piece. We don't have to wait for anybody.
It was amazing for me to learn that was possible. And with a couple of folks, Paul's one of them, the Zero Boys guy, who became a very successful audio engineer. He and I have been lifelong friends, and he was John Mellencamp's engineer for many years. And now he's a professor at Indiana University teaching engineering, but he was another punk kid, and he was a few years ahead of me, and he had the attitude of just like, if you want to make a record, you make a record. If you want to record a record, you record a record. And there's another guy, Scott Colburn, who was the leader of the band I joined in high school, and I was getting in a van and going out and playing dates out of town when I was 15 years old because he was 19 and had a van, and he was in college, and my parents weren't really paying that much attention. So he was from that spirit as well. Let's make a compilation. Let's get these bands on the national radar. We could get reviewed in Maximum Rock and Roll. That's what everyone read. So that was a really inspiring time because it was mind blowing to go within a couple of years of going to arena concerts and having the band be absolutely unreachable and untouchable and a pedestal to being something where if we liked the band, we could figure out how to contact them and bring them to our town on a tour and hang out with them and get them to skate our half pipe.
And then you move on from that scene to Boston, where you would co-found the indie rock trio, the Blake Babies. Talk about that move, how you ended up moving to Boston, and talk about a little bit about how that band was founded and what the start of that looked like.
Well, those were really different times in a lot of ways, and I was a really hardworking kid when I was a teenager, but I was not working particularly hard in school. My parents are academics, and they didn't really recognize what I was doing with putting bands together and building our punk rock community as something that was of that much value. I have kids now. That my oldest is starting college next year, and I've been doing college essays. And if it didn't occur to me back then to write a college essay about how we founded an all ages club, I mean, it's incredibly entrepreneurial for teenage kids, but adults, whether it was parents or people who were opening the doors to the ivory tower, were not thinking about that sort of activity as being entrepreneurial, but it really was. Even though it wasn't about making money, it was about creating opportunity. And I didn't really want to go to college because I wasn't a disciplined student, and I really just wanted to get a band and move to a city where I could do it for real. So I went to Berklee College of Music, where and it actually turned out to be really hard. I went there for a couple of years, and I was playing catch up because I wasn't really very educated as a musician. I had to catch up on the education front. But what I really wanted to do was meet like-minded musicians and get something going. And I had the good fortune of meeting Juliana Hatfield in my first year. And she was looking for the same thing. And I convinced my girlfriend Frida to move out to Boston, and we started the band. And it was very much with that same DIY approach that I learned about in the punk scene. We put out our first record ourselves. I'd sort of studied the Boston scene to the point where I figured out how you would go about getting a gig in a club. We figured out how to get in the studio, and back then you could put a song on a reel-to-reel tape and bring it into a college radio station and they'd play it. So it was I was definitely more focused on getting the band up and running than I was in school. I did okay in school, but within a couple of years we had things going, and I met the Lemonheads through doing all those my kind of networking, and I was the drummer in the Lemonheads back then. So I was doing exactly what I wanted to do. I didn't have two nickels to rub together for music, but it was a blast. And that was really the goal at that point, was to be able to play shows and make records and maybe go on tour someday. So that was a really, really exciting run. And I had a great luck in getting to be part of that scene, which was quite amazing.
You use the word entrepreneurial there, and I think that's kind of a crucial distinction. So many times when people think of art and artists, they think that that's separate from business, and maybe running a business or managing a business is not what artists are into. But being an entrepreneur and starting a business is much different than managing it in some ways. And it does feel like a very artistic task to have to make everything. Like you said, figure out how we're going to get into clubs and figure out how we're going to physically record the music and then how we're going to physically distribute it. Those are all three very separate problems, and it's kind of fun for artists to solve problems.
Well, I had a goal. I think we had a goal, which was we wanted an audience, and we were very obsessive about the music we were making and trying to reach people with it. And I sort of addressed it as a problem solving exercise. How do we do each of these things? And I really was taking the lead in that. And I think when I got to the point where I found my lane in the music business and started helping artists to solve their problems, I realized that I've sort of always been that guy. Mm-hmm. I was always the person saying, how do we get a gig? How do we get our gear there? How do we find a place to practice? And not that Juliana and Frida weren't participating in that, they were, but I was definitely the one saying, we can do this, let's figure it out. And in the Lemonheads, it was someone else. It was Jesse Peretz, who was the bass player, who is a very successful filmmaker now, who was the guy that was kind of doing all that stuff for that band. Mm-hmm. And every band that has any kind of success has to have somebody like that who's motivating and kind of moving things forward. And it was definitely not about making money at the time. That was such a such a pipe dream to think we could make money. We really wanted to be able to afford to get a van and maybe someday have hotel rooms and, maybe someday not have to pick up crappy jobs when we get home to be able to pay the rent. That was the goal. It was about being able to keep doing it because the band itself, although it was hard and we always had personality conflicts like any bands do, getting on stage and playing our songs and having people know the words and be there for it and create that energy was the end goal.
What do you think you took away from that period? And I know you said that there were different periods, but this is all, Indiana and Boston, they're both formative periods for you. What do you think you took away from those that you still carry with you now, that you learned about the business end that you wouldn't have had if you hadn't come up in a more DIY space like that?
Well, I have a commitment to substantive fairness that I think was really about that era of the music business scene. One of the episodes of yours I listened to that I really enjoyed was Ian MacKay, who's a hero of mine, who I've also met and spent a little bit of time with, and he's one of these real pragmatists who thinks a lot about what's fair and was very influential. And there are other people like that. He was one of the people in the punk scene who was encouraging people to start their own labels. And there was a kind of a general understanding in those days about fairness, about if a label is investing in the project and taking a risk, they should get paid something, but they shouldn't keep all the money and let the artist starve. There was a sense of substantive fairness about it, and of everybody trying to accomplish goals that were as much about the community and the culture as they were about the bank account. And my business life definitely started with an ideology that's rooted in hardcore punk, and it was about empowering artists. And now that I'm a guy running a label, which is a fairly mainstream label that's a fairly big business, I have to actively think about those things and keep track of them because I think they're still really important. It's still really important to think about creative freedom for artists and making fair deals and living up to what we promised to do, because those are all definitely part of our ideology back then, which was shared across the entire community.
Definitely. And I think at a certain point, what that punk ethos really got right is that I think all good business is actually about fairness. I don't think that you can run any business, whether you're selling plumbing parts or whether you're selling records, and think that you can get over on your partners all the time going forward. You're not going to run any business over the long haul where you're always getting over on other people. I mean, people they don't want to do business with you after a certain point.
Right. Right. And our business has not the best reputation, and I think it's well earned. And, I think that having a commitment to doing right by artists that we share is really, really important. And it's complex. It's not just about money. It's about the entire process and dealing with creativity. I spent a few years in law practice before I had the opportunity to really work in music, working in the corporate world. And it was really interesting to have to work in a business where creativity didn't really come into it in that way, because creativity is kind of that third rail that for a lot of creators is actually more important than the money making part. After they get past the needs of survival, it's incredibly important for creators to be able to maintain control over their work and integrity of their work. And that's something that if people working in our business, they'd better understand that and appreciate it. And I would have a harder time understanding and appreciating it had I not been a creator for so long, had I not come from this creative place.
You mentioned a moment ago that you said that you finally found your lane in the music business. Can you talk about what that transition was like? Because I think that that's something that a lot of people struggle with. They start in music in a creative way and things don't go exactly how they had planned for. And some people just quit at that point, and some people morph and move on and figure it out. Can you talk about that period of transition and if it was difficult for you, if it was a natural transition? How did you feel as you were making it, and why did you make it?
It was very definitely not natural. It was painful. It was really kind of difficult period of my life. I'd set a kind of a, what would you call it? The opposite of a goal, sort of a deadline in my life, that I wanted to have reached a certain point of success with music by age 30 if I was going to keep going.
Mm-hmm.
And I had some success really early, and it came pretty easy. By the time we were 20 or 21 years old and Blake Babies, we were touring the country, we'd accomplished a lot of our goals. And that's when the kind of big business comes in, the major labels and stuff. And by the time I was in my later 20s and I was back in the Lemonheads, they were playing big stages and major festivals and touring the world. And I really, was on a pretty straight line until I hit about my very late 20s. And I really did hit a point where it got hard. And Blake Babies broke up. I had my own record deal, but I'd never really conceived of myself as being a front person, and it wasn't a natural fit for me. I really wanted to be in a more collaborative situation. Lemonheads was kind of a mess. And so I hit 30, and I really didn't have my ducks in a row to the point where it was something that I felt like this is a career that's going the way I wanted to. Mm-hmm. And I'd met my wife. We've been married 20 years. We wanted to have a family. She's not from the music world. She was somebody who went to business school and had a job. And I had to do something to make a living. And I just, going to law school for me was kind of a panic. It was kind of like hitting the panic button, because I never thought about being a lawyer. And I thought about it a little bit because I admired what some lawyers did, seemed like something I could do. And I'd gotten more and more interested in the business and copyright and stuff, but I didn't really have a clear path for it. So I went to law school, and when I got to law school, I found that it was something that I was much better at than I ever expected. And I did really well in law school. I was one of the top people in my class, and I had great opportunities coming out of law school. And I just at the time thought, well, okay, this is a new direction. I guess this is what I'm doing now. I'm going to be a corporate lawyer, and that's what I was. Mm-hmm. I got a job at a big firm where I was putting on a suit and going to work every day and working on, these financial deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars. It was very strange and disorienting to be in that world. But I really, really missed music, and I missed creativity, and I was not happy in that corporate situation. So then it became a really active effort on my part to find my way back to music, to build a clientele within the law where I could represent creative people. So that's when it got professionally difficult for me, was having to actually then build that.
That had to feel pretty good, though, to have made that pivot and realized, like, oh, hey, I actually do have a set of skills that people really want. Because sometimes in music, you can work so hard and you can finish something that you think sounds exactly what you think it should sound like, and then you put it out into the world and it just goes into the gaping maw and you never hear from anyone ever again. But so it must have felt really good, difficult as that time was, to say, hey, I actually have attributes that people will pay to avail themselves of.
Well, it was great, and it's great in a way that I know you'll appreciate. I know a lot of musicians will appreciate, because when you're trying to make it as a musician, it's such a crapshoot all the time. Yeah. You get into this cycle where you're putting out a record every couple of years or whatever. Now it's maybe putting out music every few months, and you invest a lot of hopes and dreams and creative effort and energy into it, and then you put it out there and it does what it does, and maybe it moves things forward or maybe it doesn't, but you feel like you don't have a whole lot of control over it. And that was one of the things that I found most frustrating. And it wasn't that I didn't have crushing failure. All the music I put out was well received, and I always had people that wrote nice things about it and came out to my shows. It just never quite got me to the point where it's like, okay, obviously now I'm a full-on professional musician. Mm-hmm. And when I got to law school, I realized that it's like, the myth of Sisyphus, right?
Yeah.
Pushing the boulder up the hill. If you read Camus' take on that, there's an immense satisfaction in kind of getting that boulder to the top of the hill and letting it drop to the bottom again. Yeah. And that's what being in school is like. It's this sort of reward for doing your work where you get a grade and then you advance, and you can do this and this and this, and then you're going to get a job and make $100,000. to sort of see how that works is completely crazy when you've been gutting it out as an independent musician for a long time. So that was like, oh, great. This is much easier. But the problem was that the center of it, there wasn't any kind of, spiritual core or passion to what I was doing. I didn't really care about the moving the money around stuff. I cared about music, and I continue to care about music. So that's why it was so crucial. I got to the point where if I was still a corporate lawyer now, I'd have my kids, I have a wonderful family. I'm sure that I would have a happy, fulfilling life, but there would be a big piece missing. Mm-hmm. And also, in point of fact, if I would have stayed in the first job that I had as a lawyer, I would make a lot more money now.
Sure.
It was a path to immense wealth, what I was doing, working in a big firm and in corporate practice. But I was certainly, and it's probably controversial. I don't think my wife would want to talk about it too much in too much detail, but I definitely took a turn where I decided I was going to not pursue the making a lot of money route to do something that I was passionate about. And I don't know if there's a lesson to be gleaned from that for other people, but for me, it's great to get to the point where you think you do one thing and you try to do it as well as you can, and you get to the point where you're never going to be that guy, who's at the very top of it, and then you find you have something else you can do well. And for me, at this point, 53 years old, there's nothing I'd rather be doing. I don't want to be out there touring. I make music for joy. I make music because it's, something I'm good at that I can share with my friends. And I still write songs. I still make recordings. I just don't do it in public because there's no reason to.
No, I totally get that. Well, and now that the pandemic has hit, I'm with you too, man. I don't think I ever want to tour ever again. This is really seeing my family every day.
It's a young man's game,
it is.
And I mean, if you're doing it at the level where you're playing arenas and you're flying places and have a bunch of people to make the show happen, then I'm sure it's really gratifying in some way. But it's still hard to be away from your family. And I've raised 3 kids and I've seen them every day pretty much, and I have to travel a little bit, but not lately. And for the last 9 months, we've all been in this house together, and it's joyous.
Yes.
And that was something I thought about when I went back to school: is do I want to keep rolling the dice on playing music because I'm going to have kids and I want to be in their lives? And the answer to that is absolutely.
Right. Well, then
wouldn't trade that for anything.
Talk to me a little bit about that shift from your things are working for you. You're at a corporate firm, as you said, you're moving money around and they are rewarding you handsomely for doing that. But there's a spiritual void there, and you decide to take the dive back into the creative world, albeit in a different role. But then you're very successful. This is before Rounder happens. You are very successful, it seems like very early on, in helping other artists find a home, label-wise and just career-wise. I'm talking about Alabama Shakes, Sturgill Simpson. Talk to me about that next chapter for you and how you approached it.
Well, I'll probably say this in every interview I ever do for all my life. My lucky break professionally was working with Justin Vernon and Bon Iver, because I was, and fortunately I didn't have to walk away from my security to do this. I was in Birmingham, Alabama. That's where my wife is from, and that's where I went to school, and that's where I got my corporate job, was in Birmingham, which is a good music scene, but it's not really a particularly happening music scene. I think I can say that without insulting people. It's a town full of great musicians, and actually since then some have emerged from there, but it's not the epicenter of the music business like Nashville is. But I was committed to being there because my wife had a job that she loved there, and I was at a firm and it was going well. So the partners that supervised me at the firm were very generous with letting me take on music clients, even though there wasn't that much dough in it.
Sure.
And I started helping people just in the time that I had. And I was actually okay with that model of my career, to say I'm going to be a guy that does regular law stuff, and then I'll help musicians, and this will be, kind of a little sidebar to what I do that actually makes the money. But then about a year into doing music deals, I was referred Bon Iver, and that project really blew up, and it became something where it really kind of got me on the radar. People knew who I was from the Lemonheads and stuff in the industry. I had friends there, but having a client like that was suddenly so central to a certain scene of music got other people noticing me. So I was able to build more of a clientele based on the guy that, being the Bon Iver guy.
Sure.
And also Justin Vernon is such a creative musician, with such a strong vision for his creativity that I learned a lot in business from working with him and his team, because although he was very successful and has made a lot of money, it was never about making money. It was about the art.
Mm-hmm.
And it was about the integrity of the art. And if you work on the legal side of music, if you're doing a good job, then you're thinking a lot about how to protect the integrity of the art according to the artist's vision. And a lot of the artists that I worked with after that had very, very strong creative direction, like the Shakes, like Sturgill, like Phoebe Bridgers, a ton of them that I worked with were very, very creative. And the creativity was a place where none of those artists would compromise at all.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of my work, when it came to what I was actually doing to add value to what they did, was about making sure that the deals they did were going to be good deals with strong companies that would be able to, help them reach their business goals, that would basically not mess with their creativity in a way that would cause problems for them. Because if you take any of those artists and say, I'll pay you $10 million if you let me just, tell you how to make your records, they're going to say no.
Yeah.
This is about my music. I'm not going to let somebody get in the way of my creativity. I'll do it for nothing. That's true of every great creative artist I've ever met in my life.
Yes. Yeah. Well,
they wouldn't trade that for any amount of money.
No, indeed. It goes back to that Gillian Welch song. We're going to do it anyway, even if it doesn't pay. And that's the big, dirty little secret there about creative people.
Right.
Can you remember a specific lesson that you learned early on from Bon Iver and his creative team there, where you thought to yourself, that's interesting. They're really making a different choice here. That's clearly not just about the bottom line.
Yeah, I mean, I do remember one, and I can't really talk in specifics about
Sure.
my practice because it's all confidential, but I can talk about it in very broad terms. There was one situation, and I think about this as a label guy because, he had a different label in Europe than he did in America, and there was something that the European label really wanted in terms of a kind of a concession so that they could better market and promote the music. And, they kind of came to the manager and came to the American label saying, we really want to do this. We think it's incredibly important to the campaign, blah, blah, blah. And then the answer was, well, this is up to the artist. So then the artist got on the phone and said no. Mm-hmm. And they were shocked, They're like, what? But don't you understand how this will make it more successful? I mean, it's laughable now because he's at the very top, there's,
yeah.
It wasn't like he needed this to make some kind of concession that the label wanted so that he could be more successful. He was already as successful as he'd ever dreamed of being. Now he's more successful because he's done it on his terms with integrity.
Yes. I think, you mentioned something earlier that I think is crucial as well. I think for every artist, they do want to hit that point where it's like they can live in a place and pay the rent or pay the mortgage and eat and do okay, but it's a very modest number for most artists that they're willing to just live at and be like, okay, my basic needs are being taken care of. I'm good to go after this.
Right. Well, but I've also found, and this is true it was true of myself, and it's true of every artist that I've ever worked with, which is that in another sense, when they start to reach the goals that they set up for themselves, they move the goalpost.
Sure.
And it's mostly it's usually not specifically about money. It's usually about building an audience and, how big you want the thing to get. And, to say, well, we really want to get to this level, and then they get to this level, and then they see a level beyond that. And also that there's so much emotion in what we do. There's so much, sort of strange competition that comes into it, looking around, seeing what other people are doing and being envious of someone else's success. That's just such a big part of the world of creative work. It's because everybody's feeling the same insecurities. Everybody's feeling that, that they don't have ground to stand on and they get anxiety about it. And, that's something that's very pervasive too, I think.
It is, and that's something that can actually, it seems like, at least in my personal career, that has really clouded my judgment on more than one occasion. Can you think of a time when you've had to counsel people that you've been working with, or had to do yourself in a way to not make those comparisons so that they can see things more clearly?
Well, I mean, I deal with that all the time.
Mm-hmm.
It's a constant, and it's something that I personally felt, and I recognize in others, because coming up in the Boston scene, it was a very strange time. It's going back to the late '80s, but there was a moment when all these bands sort of blew up around us at the same time. Pixies were there, Lemonheads, of course, Throwing Muses, Buffalo Tom. There are all these bands that were having success, and Galaxy 500, and we'd all just been these bands playing these little clubs in this little scene, and then all of a sudden all these bands are blowing up overseas and stuff like that. It was a very strange emotional landscape, because it was really, really hard to sort of separate these feelings of anxiety and competition that I felt towards people that I loved and was friends with. And, ultimately I got to the point where, I didn't begrudge anybody their success, but there's a point when you're in your early 20s and, feeling sort of entitled, that's very, very hard to process. Mm-hmm. And I recognize that in artists. And, you want everybody to be very practical and pragmatic about things, but these emotions come into it, and it's nothing against the people that are feeling those emotions. They're very real.
They are. Do you think that there are ways that you're able to counsel younger musicians through that, or do you think that is a process that people just have to work through on their own, in a way, just time takes care of it?
Yeah, I think the latter. I don't, as a lawyer, it wasn't really my place to be, right, like a psychologist to that degree. My place was, I had to be very clear about what I was doing, and a lawyer, like a deal lawyer, transactional lawyer, we call it, is a risk manager. So what I would look at primarily is, what are the risks? What are the risks of doing this deal? What are the risks of not doing this deal? What are the risks of, not getting contracts for this work you're having someone do, and explaining those risks. And I had some artist clients who I would have a much deeper, more personal dialogue with, but, I would try to avoid being somebody that would give advice on things that were not particularly germane to my job, which was being the person to manage risks. And as a label guy, I generally don't have relationships that are that close with artists, because it's a little bit dangerous. It's like they have a manager, and I mean, I think there's a sort of level of appropriateness of how you interact with artists that we have to observe. And, I think it would be very out of line for me as a label president to be saying, hey, you're just jealous of those folks, you don't really deserve that, or whatever. Yeah. So I try to avoid, having communications that go that deep at that point. But, I've known so many creative people in my life that I've seen that it's absolutely present in just about everybody that takes it on, because of that insecurity, because of the kind of cocktail that constitutes the makeup of a creative artist in general. Who wants to take on this work? Who's willing to get in a crappy van for 6 months and sleep on floors to do this? There's got to be something driving it that's, all-consuming passion. Well, that's going to lead to a lot of emotion, right?
Before John moved back into music as an attorney and then as president of Rounder, there was a moment in his life where it looked like he might leave that chapter of his life behind. He was making good dough in the corporate world, and he had a young family to take care of. Perhaps what drew him back to music was the incongruity between his bohemian younger years and his workaday young adulthood. There's a wonderful poem that speaks to that incongruity by the poet Philip Levine, entitled Buying and Selling. All the way across the Bay Bridge I sang to the cool winds buffeting my Ford. for I was on my way to a life of buying untouched drive shafts, universal joints, perfect bearings so steeped in cosmoline they could endure a century and still retain their purity of functional design. They could outlast everything until, like us, their usefulness became legend and they were transformed into sculpture. At Benicia, or the Oakland Naval Yard, or Alameda, I left the brilliant western sun behind to enter the wilderness of warehouses with one sullen enlisted man as guide. There, under the blinking artificial light, I was allowed to unwrap a single sample, to hack or saw my way with delicacy through layer after layer of cardboard, metallic paper, cloth webbing, wax as hard as wood, until the dulled steel was revealed beneath. I read, if I could, the maker's name, letters, numbers, all of which translated into functions and values known only to the old moguls of the great international junk companies of Chicago, Philadelphia, Brooklyn, whose young emissary I was. I, who at 20 had wept publicly in the Dexter Davison branch of the public library over the death of Keats in the Colburn biography, and had prayed like him to be among the immortals, now lived at 30 by a code of figures so arcane they passed from one side of the brain to the other only in darkness. I, who at 26 had abandoned several careers in salesmanship, copper kitchenware, Fuller brushes, American encyclopedias, from door to unanswered door in the down-and-out neighborhoods of Detroit, turning in my sample cases like a general handing over his sidearms and swagger stick. I now relayed the new gospels across mountains and the Great Plains states to my waiting masters. The news came back, bid, and we did, and did so in secret. The bids were awarded, and so trucks were dispatched. Mohawks, Tam O'Shanter's Iroquois. In New Wellingtons, I stood to one side while the forklifts did their work, entering only at the final moment to pay both loaders and drivers their pittances not to steal, to buy at last what could not be bought. The day was closing down. Even in California, the afternoon skies must turn from blue to a darker blue and finally take the color of coal. And stars, the same or similar ones, hidden so long above the Chicago River or the IRT to Brooklyn, emerge stubbornly not in ones but in pairs, for there is safety in numbers. Silent, alone, I would stand in the truck's gray wake, feeling something had passed, was over, complete. The great metal doors of the loading dock crashed down, and in the sudden aftermath, I inhaled a sadness stronger than my lucky strike. Stronger than the sadness of these hills and valleys with their secret ponds and streams unknown even to children, or the sadness of children themselves, who, having been abandoned, believe their parents will return before dark. Well, then talk to me then about your latest chapter, which is you are now the president of Rounder Records, a historic label. Talk to me how that came to be, because it doesn't necessarily flow that you go from that role as lawyer for musicians to this. Like, how did this opportunity come about, and why was it a good fit for you?
Well, for me, since leaving being a full-time creative person, it's been sort of moving further and further back into creativity. Mm-hmm. And being an artist lawyer was more creative than being a corporate lawyer, because I deal with creative people and I deal with creative challenges. Well, but if you're doing a good job as a lawyer for artists, you're not really involved in the creative part of it. It's not really part of what I do. I don't really have a place to have a voice in the creative part of it. And that's okay. Mm-hmm. But I really wanted to find a way to be more creative. And I think if somebody would have offered me the job that I have now when I was 30, when I was first realizing that it was not a, great career prospect to just keep going, mm-hmm. I would have been like, hell yes, and taken that job, and I would have been terrible at it. I would have utterly failed because I would have had no idea what I was doing.
Why would you have failed at it then?
because I thought I understood the business much better than I actually did.
Mm-hmm.
And having 10 years in law practice was a way to really get a much better overview of the business and understand the mechanics of it.
Mm-hmm.
And our business is changing so fast now that anybody that says, oh, this is, industry standard, or, that they understand the business, is lying, because it's an absolute shapeshifter,
Yes.
I mean, especially now that we have the changes coming from COVID. I mean, we're all having to, kind of work every day to stay present and try to get ahead of things, because it's so incredibly challenging.
Yes.
But I just didn't have the real kind of chops to do it at that point.
Mm-hmm.
I had good taste, and I had a sense for how people interacted with music, but I wouldn't have been able to lead a team. I wouldn't have had the the kind of emotional skills to be able to lead a team. I wouldn't have been able to work with people who are my essentially my bosses, who I'm taking direction from. That's something that I definitely learned from working in law firms and stuff, that I didn't have those skills at the time. So there's just a million things that I couldn't have done well.
Sure.
And, I feel like I'm a guy that caught my big break at 50.
Right.
I got a door open, and I got to do what I've always wanted to do, which is exactly what I'm doing, which is running a label. And it was absolutely heartbreaking on a lot of levels to walk away from a business I built, and to end all these business relationships with these clients that I love so much.
Mm-hmm.
But it was worth it, because, here's an opportunity to really build something, yes, with this iconic label, with these incredible resources, with, a company, Concord, that has this vision that I think is really needed in the industry, because it's so focused on artists.
Mm. So can you kind of describe, when you come in the door at Rounder, what does the culture look like, and what are some of the changes you have to make as a leader, either culturally or direction-wise, for the label, that you thought were going to be necessary to kind of stay competitive?
Well, Rounder is 50 years old this year, or actually 2020 was 50 years old, so it's been around for a long time. And in fact, the people that founded the label are still involved. There's 3 individuals who founded the label who, still have a role in it. They don't own it anymore because they sold it to Concord. Concord's a company that has acquired, it's a, pretty big company that's acquired a lot of these iconic companies, and, run some of them as frontline labels like Fantasy and, Concord Jazz, and some of the companies running within Concord are ones that have been around for a long time. Well, there is a tradition with each of these companies that has value. The brand has value. So, for me, it was really squaring, how do you have a modern label that's able to take the kinds of genres that we're interested in working with, which are very, song-oriented, artist-oriented genres, and make them work in this, really challenging, emerging landscape of consumption, while keeping at the heart of it, what's always been great about the label that's produced Alison Krauss and George Thorogood and all these great careers. So it's really squaring those things, having the heart of it still be about great music, great songs, great artists, great records, but to actually be competitive in where we're going in the industry, which is would have been unthinkable 20 years ago.
Right.
I think that's the big move we're seeing, is from, a record company selling records to a record company that's, in this consumption business. It's totally different, and the danger is that, some of these great, wonderful sort of outsider genres like folk and Americana and, blues will get completely marginalized. And, I think that's what we're competing against, and it can only, we can only have a successful business if we're working with great artists and putting out incredible music.
Why do you think that genres like that, like Americana and folk, kind of more niche genres, why do you think that they would be more kind of on the chopping block in this age of consumption rather than in an earlier age?
Well, it's not exactly the chopping block. It's just that popular music, now that we're in this consumption model where, younger people are engaging with music in different ways than older people did, it's like you want to be able to find a way to preserve institutions like the album, that are really important to the art form, when people coming up don't really think in terms of sitting down and listening to a 40-minute chunk of music. And because there's so much volume of consumption for, young people and virality and, things that are popular all over the world, that's where it gets marginalized. Something can be very popular, like you take a Jason Isbell or something like that, who, if you look at his streaming numbers compared to a hip hop artist, it looks very, kind of pales in comparison. But then you look at his ability to, sell out 12 nights in a row at the Ryman and have everybody singing every song every night. Obviously, not only is that music reaching people, but it's kind of working on a mass scale. It's just a different kind of mass scale than you see when it's Post Malone or something like that.
Right.
So, we would like to have, and I'm talking about across the industry for these genres, we would like to have a much more well-worn path to real mainstream success and not have the mainstream be closed off, because it is a great environment, as you know, for artists that are, more kind of in the middle class, making a living to own a home and support a family as opposed to being big business. There's a difference.
Right. I gotcha. Yeah. Cause I run a pretty lean independent operation. And for me, I really kind of like this landscape because it's like, well, I can be a guy that I live in Maryland. I don't live in some, music, center of the world. And yet I can continue to have what I almost consider to be like a boutique business that's open. I have a storefront on Spotify in everyone's pockets around the world. And it works for me for what I want to do. But basically your point is it's kind of good for that, but not so good if you're looking to scale this type of music to a more mainstream audience.
That's right. And I think, like, for example, with a lot of the artists that I've worked with in my law career, these are artists that have really found mainstream success from independent companies, from niche genres. Sturgill is a great example. Bon Iver is a great example. It's possible. It's just, hard to replicate. And, these are sort of isolated examples. And the mission is, hey, we can build more big careers that are really going to, kind of reach a lot of people around the world from these genres where, you think of it as more challenging because it's, that's so much, seems so much more readily available for hip hop and mainstream pop and commercial country.
Without giving away your proprietary secret sauce that you're working with here, what are some strategies that you guys are implementing to make that a more regular and usual thing for your artists to be able to upstream like that?
Well, I mean, this is something that's been in flux very much, this strange COVID period, because we knew going into it that it was about, and I hate the word content, but it's about, connecting with fans with, the kind of visual content that draws people in, and, creating excellent sort of visual, sort of materials that further the music, that bring people into it. And then, I think one of the reasons why I was suggesting to people who I was working with years ago that they might want to go with a label rather than go it on their own is because obviously there are resources for, finding more opportunity in the streaming space, with having sophisticated resources like we have in-house here. And, we also are very focused on radio as something that really still gets music like the music that we're bringing into the world out to fans, and in usual times, how you support touring and build careers through regionally through having artists, pursue opportunities as they're on tour, whether it's radio or press and, publicity. I mean, all these buckets that you usually think about. The reason why it was so appealing for me to be here at Rounders, because we have this incredible set of resources with our service teams that we use, that we can, come up with clever creative marketing plans with our Rounder team, and then push them out to people that actually execute on a very high level. Gotcha. So that's kind of a basic overview, but we I think there are a lot of things that are kind of old school about the way that we do things, especially when it comes to, working to radio and doing it regionally and stuff like that. But, I think there's a lot of value in that.
Indeed. And I would imagine you guys still have, networks with the record stores that are still open, that are tapped into their communities.
Yeah, that's another piece of it, which is huge, which is we have a big vinyl business, and that's a big priority for us. And having relationships with independent retail is incredibly important. And God, I hope that independent retail, comes back stronger than ever after COVID, because that's one of the things that's been incredibly challenged is those businesses that go away when people can't go out into public. So I mean, that's one of the pieces of this that are so important, that people are still buying vinyl records, because, as I said, I mean, this, artists that I've worked with over my career, almost to an individual, think about their art in terms of albums. Yes. And that includes younger artists. I've worked with a lot of much younger artists who still, are saying, I can't wait to make an album. Right. That's just music fans. If you're a music fan, you probably have admiration for that as an art form, that as a body of work. And I think it's incredibly important that we follow that as long as we can. And one huge part of that is selling high quality vinyl records to music fans. Indeed.
What do you look for? Obviously, developing talent and spotting talent is one of your huge attributes. Besides just looking at the quality of music, which is obviously paramount, I would assume, to what you're looking for. What other qualities are you looking for in an artist before you sign them?
Yeah, this is something I was really able to refine in my law career, because I was able to see so many projects and which ones succeeded and failed. And there were some projects I worked on as a lawyer that I was sure would be successful that just weren't. And, and some that kind of surprised me, that were much more successful than I predicted they would be. And it comes down to so many things. And, I try to constantly refine my own understanding of what it is about an artist that's going to, make them a good candidate to have a real successful career. And I mean, a lot of it is the ambition and the functionality of the individual. How hard do they work? How, kind of how level-headed are they? How able to collaborate are they? And how badly do they want to pursue it? And you can kind of see that. It's like every time I've sat in the room for the first time with an artist who's, going to go on to be a household name, I kind of knew it.
Really?
You probably had that experience. Yeah, you just see some in their eyes where they're just going to do what they need to do to get it out there. That is assuming that the work is great.
Yes.
And, then beyond that, there's the team aspect of it. It's like we don't so much work directly with artists as a label. We work with the artist team. We work with the management. Mm-hmm. We work with the agents. And so, if a developing artist comes onto my radar, the first thing I'm going to want to know is who's involved in the project, who's the manager. Is this somebody that is sophisticated, somebody that we like to work with, is it somebody that's going to, treat the label as a punching bag? These are important questions.
Right.
And, is it an artist that's ready to tour, and do they have a really good touring infrastructure? Do they have a great agent? Do they have, something going internationally? Because that's incredibly important. And I kind of look at all of that. And maybe it's something that's well established, where we're just looking at, okay, there's some revenue there, there's a career there, then it's more about, do we kind of share a vision about this, and, do we have an understanding about what we're doing?
Sure.
One of the most satisfying projects I've worked on since I've been at Rounder has been Indigo Girls. That's just a wonderful project to work on. And, they're pretty mature and far along in their career. They know exactly what they're doing, and they know exactly what they want out of a label, and as does their management. So, we're able to work together really effectively. So, that's really different from the, signing somebody like one of the artists I'm really excited about that we signed recently is a woman named Sierra Farrell, who spent years as a street performer. We discovered her with a YouTube video.
Oh, wow.
And, it was really taking that from the ground. And, we have an album coming out in the middle of the year. And, that's a real development project where my colleague, Gary Pachoza, who's the head of A&R for Rounder, he's a world-class producer engineer. So his role in that project was not only, finding out about and building a relationship with the artist and signing her, but also making the record. So, that's a very different kind of project where, we're starting sort of from scratch and trying to build something, that's ready to find prominence around the world. So that's incredibly exciting.
That really is kind of old school, having A&R like Gary who are bringing artists in, also helping or completely producing the album. And then, so you guys have that in-house, and then you have your marketing in-house and distribution. And that's like the snout to tail dining version of the music business right there.
Yeah, no, you're right. And that's not the case every time. Gary will work on a couple of things a year. We had an artist named Katie Pruitt whose album came out right at the beginning of the pandemic, who was somebody that he had sort of facilitated and engineered the record with a young producer. And, there's something incredibly satisfying about that. But yeah, Gary's approach is definitely old school. And it's makes it feel like the label is has a deeper involvement if we're actually, contributing to A&R to the point where, we're our own employees literally making the record. And we also do that. We have somebody in-house who does a lot of our content. So, we're not outsourcing those things. So that's definitely part of the larger plan.
What does a great day look like for you in your job right now? Like, what do you look forward to the most as one of your tasks or domains?
That's so hard to answer right now because I've been in my house for 10 months.
Yeah, right.
On Zoom calls every day.
Okay, well, pretend I'm asking this question in December of 2019.
Right. Well, look, I mean, my passion is artists. It's finding great artists. I'm a geek. I'm a music fan. Whenever I start to get frustrated because I don't have any music I'm obsessed with, and something knocks me over the head, and so I like to be in it on that level. I'm obsessive about music, and I do a lot of traveling around and looking for great music and meeting people and just talking about music, talking about the careers they're trying to build, and that social part of it is what I really enjoy the most. But I also really love the strategy of, like, okay, we have this record now. How do we connect the dots? How do we figure out how to use these resources we have and really be competitive in this modern day and age where everything's changing so fast. So one of the great things about my job is that typically if I'm not stuck at home for 10 months, every day is really different from every other day. I don't have many days where I'm just in the office, staring at a laptop all day. I'm usually out meeting, interacting with people, building community, explaining to people what's cool about what we're doing, just like I'm doing now,
right.
And that's exciting for me.
What's the hardest part about your job now?
Well, the hardest part is that, we're not just art curators. We're in a commercial business.
Right.
And,
yeah.
It has to be about making money. And that's one of the luxuries I had as a lawyer is I was just a full-time, full-on advocate for the artist. Whatever the artist wanted to do, however they wanted to pursue their career, I was there to support them. And, now it's like I work for a company that has a board of directors and we are in a commercial business where it has to be about making money. So squaring, the creative integrity, finding the kinds of artists who are going to be, reach a point of the kind of popularity where it makes sense to be at a label of our size, while actually kind of hitting those financial goals, that's a difficult dance.
Yes.
And it's a different kind of conversation. And, we have to be very clear at all times that and I want the artist to make money too. We're in a commercial business, and the central intent of it is the merging of making, creating, disseminating great art and making money.
Yes.
And that's a difficult balance.
It is. Responsibility is eminently rewarding, but it's also on some level a bummer. I have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, and I found myself the other day, I just been spending like the whole day telling my son, my 4-year-old, don't do this, don't do that, and I was like, man, it is such a bummer sometimes to have to be the person where the buck stops there. You know what I mean? Like, but someone has to be the person where the buck stops there.
Well, that is definitely the role of a president of any company is being ultimately responsible for everything, and I have to take responsibility for everything. And there's a lot of navigating difficult relationships in my life, and I'm at the age where I am, where I'm having to learn new skills all the time, and I'm very, very committed to being a great executive now, and that's a different thing from trying to be a great artist or even trying to be a great lawyer. It's a different skill set. It's incredibly varied. It's a hard job, but I'm very grateful to have it, and I'm working hard every day to rise to it.
It seems like in every phase of your career, from being a creator in the indie rock world to being first corporate counsel and then counsel for artists and now an executive, it seems like one skill that would have had to transfer across all of those is negotiation with other people and getting buy-in from other people. What have you learned about negotiation over the course of all those phases of your career?
Well, one of the things that I like now is that I have a team. I have a lawyer I work with. So when we're negotiating deals, when you're talking about negotiating in the kind of classic sense of making deals, I have a lot of really good help to to kind of make the kind of financial assessments and think about the risks of the company, because it's not risks that I'm taking, it's risks the company's taking. So
right.
I have a good backstop there, and having very smart people to work with. So, I enjoy the process of negotiating terms and deals and stuff, but like the constant negotiations that I do, one of the things that I have to constantly do is be persuasive in terms of, convincing people that it's a good opportunity to work with us, and to sort of explain what the strengths of the label are and what we're going to be able to do for an artist's career in terms of furthering their goals. And to be able to be good at that, I have to obviously know the music really well. I have to be sensitive enough to get to know the individual very quickly and kind of understand what their values are and what their goals are and hopes and dreams are, so that I can address those things. And, I think that takes a certain level of sensitivity. That's a skill that you learn over, many conversations and sitting in rooms and asking the right questions and being able to, to be persuasive in the right ways. So that's something I've definitely refined over the course of my life, to the point where, now I look forward to those meetings. I look forward to having opportunities to sit down and talk with artists about what we do and why I care about what they do and how I see them as hopefully being part of our community and what we're building.
And figuring out which artists that they're comparing themselves to on an hourly basis that's driving them insane.
Yeah, I sit down and immediately start filling their heads with insecurities.
Yeah, right. Well, man, John Strohm, thank you so much for being a part of the Working Songwriter Podcast. I learned a ton today, and I know our listeners will too.
That's great. Well, it's been a great pleasure, and I appreciate you taking the time. And
this month's show was brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. Use promo code TWS, the initials of our podcast, TWS, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. Rounder Records is constantly releasing music that is at the vanguard of roots and Americana music. You can find it anywhere music is sold or streamed. If before we meet again, you sit down to write, please remember, an expensive drug habit is not a song, a compelling Instagram account is not a song, and most importantly, reverb is not a song. So let all that take care of itself, and for you, just keep your eye on the song.